Let's see how this video turns out. Hello, you absolutely amazing person, you. My name is Sandy Boucher, and I'm going to assume that if you're on my channel watching this video, then you are interested in helping to support, encourage, or you want to work with Indigenous peoples. And I'm specifically referring to Indigenous peoples that live within Canadian borders. If you want to work with them, you're interested in what reconciliation is, or you just need to up your sales game, whatever the case may be, today I want to introduce you to a skill that as an Anishinaabe, as an Indigenous woman, I feel is incredibly valuable. I think it's essential to Indigenous engagement. So I'm going to explain it to you today, why it's valid, and I'm going to even give you a chance to practice it, honestly, because I really need you to. So let's talk about it. Bonjour, Mishko Paganan Quain Adishnakas Mangdodem. Hi everyone, my name is Sandy Boucher. I'm Red Thunderbolt Woman of the Loon Clan, a proud member of Seine River First Nation in Treaty 3 territory in Northern Ontario. And today, that valid skill I alluded to in the opening, what I'm talking about is holding space. And that is a popular phrase that people love to use, but in Indigenous, non-Indigenous engagement, I see it so rarely employed. So what I am talking about, for one, if you can't sit and listen to an Indigenous person, organization, entity, community, whatever, share their truth, then you're going to be missing the foundation of your bridge. This is another way to look at it is this is working out the nuances of the problem so you can address the problem. So that's why it's important to learn, and I'd be willing to bet the women watching this can relate to this, have not just the women, but a lot of the women, not all the women, but a lot of the women. Have you ever shared with your partner or your parent or your friend, and instead of just hearing you and letting you air it out, they jumped to wanting to solve it, or they minimized it, or worse, they started sharing about the similar circumstance they went through? And if you've experienced that, you know how any of those reactions is detrimental to the relationship. It didn't help. It's definitely not building bridges. Holding space is just sitting there listening. Now, I realize that is way easier for me to imagine doing because I have spent my fair share of hours sitting in a sharing circle, in a healing circle. And you sit there, you know that person is not talking to you. They are talking to the drum that's in the middle of the circle, or the sacred medicines, or directly to Creator, whatever the case may be, or all of the above. And you're just sitting there holding space for them and being an audience so they can release that pain and whatever they're talking about out into the air, because did you know shame needs silence to survive? And when you share, it loses its power. You got to share it in a safe space with safe people, but it works. So if you're struggling, please find that place and space and people. Instead of saying anything, you sit. Now, when we're sitting in a sharing or healing circle, we're often looking at the floor. We don't want to look at the person talking because we know they're sharing pain or shame, and we don't want them to feel even more centered out. We want them to know we're there, but we're not going to stare at them. And this is where that stereotype came from, that Indigenous people don't look you in the eye because they feel it's respectful. Baloney. Okay, we are going to totally look you in the eye, especially if we have an issue. We are not going to look you in the eyes if you're doing some personal sharing like I just described, or if we're intimidated by the space, you or both. That's why a lot of students or new hires aren't looking you in the eyes, because they're dealing with their internalized oppression. They don't think they belong there, and they're scared stiff they're going to do something wrong. They're fighting a battle in their heads. It's not because it's disrespectful to look at you. Watch when they find their confidence. They're going to be looking at you. But back to what we were talking about. When you're listening, like I said, we often stare at the floor. And then when they're done, like if someone's sharing with you in a meeting, staring at your papers, not playing with them, not playing with your pen, sitting in that discomfort with them, because if you feel uncomfortable, imagine how they feel, like 100 times worse. And you just sit there and you're staring at the table or at the floor. When they're done, you just say, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's it. So many people think if they then launch into a story of how they have felt a similar way or had a similar experience, that's going to build commonality. That is so inaccurate. Instead, what happens is the person who just shared that incredibly painful experience or something they were ashamed about or just wanted you to know who they were or are, they're sitting there thinking, so I shared all of that and you're going to make this about you. You didn't hear my experience. You immediately went to your experience. Now, the other thing that is super important, I was talking about this the other day, that so often the first meeting between Indigenous and non, that's what it should be if you want a long-term relationship with this community, entity, or person. That you have to build the foundation of the bridge. If you're instantly going to, well, what is our deliverables? What did we accomplish today? You built a foundation. You heard each other. They came to you and shared their challenges, their conflicts, the reason why they're nervous about this relationship. And in turn, you could do same, not a sales job, but honesty. Now, why am I sharing all that today? Well, for one, like I said, it's an essential part of Indigenous engagement, but I also promised you the opportunity to practice. I want to do some sharing today. And what I want you to do is practice sitting and listening to me. Stare at your desk, stare at the floor, just listen. And when I'm done, if you want to type anything into the comments, into the comments, you could simply write, thank you for sharing. Or you could, just put the asterisk silently and nods, whatever it is. I do not want to hear how you didn't want to hear it or how you've had a similar experience or any of the things I just talked about. I want you to practice just sitting and listening. Because last week was a really hard week for me. And I believe I shared that I did 2 events. One, 2S LGBTQIAP plus event, and the second one, a meeting on gender-based violence. And it wasn't those topics that got to me. I have some notes here, just some things I wanted to touch on today. One of the things that came to my mind was just the realization of why there isn't so many more Indigenous people doing the work I do. And it's because of the two sides of the feather. On the one side, the Indigenous side, I have to watch so many Indigenous people doing hurtful things, doing things that are hurting themselves or their families. I see them struggling to prove they have value and worth, which is just heartbreaking, because they definitely don't have to prove that to me. I do this work because I know they have value and worth. And then on the non-Indigenous side, I see far too often arrogance. People who think they understand and have never taken 30 seconds to try. I see them overstepping. I see them, the white savior complex, and them trying to save us. There's so much wrong on both sides. And then people wonder why we haven't reconciled yet. We have so much work to do, which is what I tried pointing out in my book, The Path. How many years ago now? 5 years ago? More than that, I believe. There are so many things. So many things. One of the things that came to my mind last week, and this, if you're a young Indigenous woman, please pay attention to this. If you know a young Indigenous woman, please share this with her, because it's important, especially if she's, well, specifically if she's from a nation that wears or makes ribbon skirts. I now have the benefit of years. I am 60 years old. I've been walking the red road for a long, long time. And guess what? Ribbon skirts didn't exist 10 years ago or 15 years ago. This is relatively new. We wore our long skirts to ceremony. We wore any long skirt to ceremony. And if you didn't have a long skirt, you wrapped a blanket around yourself. And we could go off in a debate on why, if you should be wearing a skirt or not, because my feelings on that have definitely changed. But ribbon skirts are expensive to make. And there are so many impoverished Indigenous people that need to sit near the drums. They need to hear the drums. They need to be able to sit in ceremony. And I have always been, my rule has always been, if it's disempowering, it's not our teaching. If you are trying to shame a younger, older, I don't care what age, if you're trying to shame an Indigenous woman for not wearing a fancy ribbon skirt to ceremony, or honestly, if everyone's wearing a ribbon skirt, you are shaming them for not. And unless you're buying or helping your clients make ribbon skirts and you're sure they want to wear them, then you got to be careful, because the ribbon skirts are new. It's a really good marketing campaign because everyone bought into it. I have several amazing ribbon skirts. I love them. And I've also gone to ceremony many times in a plain skirt. I don't think I've ever had to do the blanket, only because I either had a skirt with me or someone loaned me one. But yeah, you don't need the fancy regalia to dance at powwow, and you don't need a fancy ribbon skirt to sit in ceremony. Just saying. So that's one of the things I see, and I speak up when I see someone being shamed. But I know what's happening in a lot of circles I'm not in. So please use your voice. Speak up. Say something. Not if you're non-Indigenous. That would be crossing the middle of the feather. It is not up to you to correct us on our teachings. Please, some humility here. That's up to again, if you see this happening in the community, you can share this video with an Indigenous supervisor so they can act on it, but it is not your place. And that's something that privilege has mainstream struggling with. Not your place. Because privilege teaches you everything is your place, and you can be whatever you want to be, even Indigenous. Which brings me to the second problem. When someone is claiming to be non-status Indigenous because 4 generations ago their grandfather was part Indigenous, kill me now. Um, that's not non-status. That's some Indigenous ancestry. And do you know where my mind goes when I hear that? What about all the other puzzle pieces? Why are you shaming them, or why are you not proud of them? Why are you focusing on the one Indigenous puzzle piece? And it's because 99% of the time there is a benefit. That is the only reason they're doing it. There is funding involved, there is a job involved, there is recognition involved. I carry Indigenous teachings. Look at me. Aren't I valuable? I pity those people that they have not found pride and acceptance in their own culture. And that's something they should work on, because that extraction mentality and taking what they need from our culture so they can feel better is more of what is destroying Indigenous people. I have a serious effing problem with people that do that. Non-Indigenous have no business sharing Indigenous teachings because it warps it. It goes through a non-Indigenous lens. And even if you want to claim, you have Indigenous ancestry, great, wonderful, nothing wrong. It's one of your puzzle pieces. There's nothing wrong with that. But please, can you not see how that would not qualify you to be an Indigenous spokesperson, to speak for Indigenous people, because you have no Indigenous experience. You have not walked that road. What pain have you experienced because you were Indigenous? I could spend hours listing off the racism, the absolute violence, literal violence I have experienced because I'm Indigenous. Back up. Wrong side of the feather. I've spoken to that before. One other thing I wanted to speak on, and I guess this is leaving this in a good place. Over the years, this is a years thing again, I have received so many amazing gifts as a speaker's gifts, thanking me for coming out and sharing, like beautiful artwork, beautiful jewelry. I love when they give me jewelry made by a local artisan. The problem, and this is mainstream influence again, which is like, ask your Indigenous people what would be a good gift. Use your guides. I see almost a competition for who can give the best, most extravagant, maybe even most expensive or unique speaker's gift. But a couple of weeks ago, I had the chance to work with an Indigenous elder. She actually wanted advice from me, which a new place to stand. And I was so honored. Beautiful woman. I love this woman. She has such an amazing spirit. I met her a few years ago. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful woman. Anyways, after our meeting, she reached out to me and she was all apologetic because she had forgotten, in her words, had forgotten to give me tobacco and a gift. The fact that the elder wanted to offer me tobacco, again, thank you. I will not tell you what her gift was, because that is, if you know, you know, to coin a modern phrase. But I almost started crying when I received the gift, because it reminded me of decades ago when I started this journey and people knew what a gift to an elder was. Not that I'm an elder, but knew what a traditional gift was. And it was heartwarming. I have no idea how much money she spent, because that is not the point. But it touched me and it made me realize how far from our teaching some people have gotten. And maybe that is the frustration of getting older, seeing how assimilated we still are, even though decolonizing is a really good fancy term we love to throw around. Mainstream influence is still tainting our teachings to a ridiculous level. And it gets frustrating, and it gets heavy, and it gets exhausting, which is why I wanted to share with you. Because I hope that you were willing to sit with me in this. It'll get better. It always does. I'm not giving up. Don't worry. Don't have to encourage me. You don't need to tell me it'll be better. None of those comments, remember. Please just sit with me and think about it. Maybe think twice about what you do or say. Until tomorrow, I love you. Take care. Bye-bye.